Thank you very much. And my position is not very easy after this exciting and very moving presentation. So I have to use my self-regulation, if it exists, to be disciplined enough and finish on time. Otherwise, we don't have coffee, which can make us really aggressive after a while. So I have to be really, really good keeping you here, but also keeping the time frame. So what was coming into my mind before I start my very different presentation, that what your program should focus on is obviously the politicians' self-regulations abilities, because that is the biggest issue what we are facing.
I agree.
And the problem is, as we can see, and probably this could be a fascinating research to be done, why their troubled childhood and a lot of issues they haven't resolved is leading to our tragic life. Now that would be a fascinating. I'm not sure that someone would love to finance that, but perhaps we should find some money for it. Definitely. So I'm going therefore to another area, stepping back before we go into practice and brain research. And I would like to talk about child rights in early childhood, because I guess what we are trying to do is putting up a framework where it is obvious that children have a right to be handled in a gentle and nice way, and also to make children becoming right holders and coping well. We also have to empower their parents and enable them to fulfill their obligations. So that is why I guess, although it doesn't sound so exciting at first sight, perhaps it is really important to look at all the rights-based approach and all the content what the Committee on the Rights of the Child is trying to convince the state parties and all the other actors about, that we have to be sure that the policies concerning children and families are serving their best interest, and they are leading to programs that can tackle all those issues that are important for the optimum upbringing of children, and obviously ensuring that their childhood is also joyful, because this is also a right to be to enjoy your life, and not only being an investment into the future, which is often the case. So what the CRC is very clearly stating, and it's easy to say but not so easy to implement, that every human being under the age of 18 is also equal, and they are the children who are right holders equally to any other human being, but because they are children, they need more protection than the adults, and that is why the United Nations decided 25 years ago to approve the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and we are celebrating the 25th anniversary this year on the 20th of November, and I hope that everyone will celebrate it. What is interesting, if you are looking at the history of the Convention, however, that before human rights, adult human rights, were taken into consideration seriously already in 1924, the League of the Nations already agreed that the Declaration on the Rights of the Child is timely and appropriate, and this was a very early acceptance of child rights. However, the implementation hasn't been forced in any way. And then again, this was repeated in '59, and as you probably know, in the '89 Convention on the Rights of the Child has got a relatively short preparatory time, and there was a worldwide acceptance, and the problem with it is that although 194 countries ratified the convention itself, the implementation is not going as smoothly as the ratification, which is another issue, and we won't tackle that now. What is important from our topic's point of view, that the CRC, interestingly, is not focusing or not paying any special attention on young children as right holders. And therefore, the committee decided in 2005 to organize a general day of discussion on early childhood. And following this discussion, it was a very rich and fruitful discussion, they decided to produce a general comment, which is the famous General Comment 7, in 2006 on early childhood, that is focusing clearly and clarifying the importance of early childhood and implementation of rights. Now, if you look at the convention, we always say that it has to be applied holistically, and therefore early childhood is an organic part of it, so to say, so it shouldn't be taken separately. And all the principles of the universality, indivisibility, and interdependence of all human rights apply also in early childhood. However, the specific features of this period of time has to be taken into consideration. Now, according to the definition of the general comment, we are considering early childhood between 0 and 8. And we know, and the brain research, we know has not only shown us through the research, but now we can also see it through the excellent and more excellent pictures, that this is the most rapid and most determining period of growth and change, which is a big challenge, because I guess many people in the world haven't been and still are not prepared to accept the fact that in this period of time we can make miracles. But if we are missing this period, then we are struggling a lot, and the suffering for the children is even much, much worse than our suffering when we want to catch up with these missed opportunities. Now, what we know, and I don't want to repeat that, is very strong emotional needs, attachment bonding, and that means increased protection and a lot of good quality guidance for the children. Now, all the 4 principles of the CRC applies in early childhood, and there are specific importances, and I won't go into the details, just want to repeat that the right to life, survival and development is one of the most relevant in this period of life, and we have to ensure that children are provided with all those services, needs, all those services and all those activities that they need. Also, they should have a right to protection from all forms of violence and harm, which is not happening often. And then again, the definition of violation and harm can differ in the different parts of the world. In some countries, this is a natural disaster, a crisis, a war. In other countries, it is only the immaturity of the parents or the lack of opportunities, lack of access to good quality parenting opportunities, or even feeding children and providing them with shelter. Also, what is interesting and should be tackled in much more detailed way is the right to participation of young children, and their right to be listened to and heard, and their views taken into consideration. And from your example, it is quite obvious that although children are sending very different messages, and the way they can express themselves can be easily misunderstood, I guess interpretation of these messages of the children are absolutely essential, because oftentimes there is a language issue between the parent and the child, or the caretaker and the child, so they don't translate properly the message, and that can lead also to the deprivation of children, although in principle they are listened to, but they are not heard, or not heard properly. And this is, I guess, one of the most complicated issues when it comes to parents and carers and professionals working with children, because this is a very specific language, and we have to understand all layers of the language and all the methods children are expressing themselves. And then, obviously, the very often debated best interest of the child as a primary consideration in all actions concerning children. Again, this is something the committee was producing a new general comment on last year on the best interest of the child. But it should be discussed in depth, because for many, many people this is hard to accept and hard to understand, and even more complicated to implement properly. What does it mean, the best interest? What if there is a conflict of interest between different children or a group of children? What if there is a conflict of interest between the child and the parent or the family or the community? And how can we then be sure that we are implementing properly the best interest? And when is it a best interest, and what does the paramount interest mean compared to the best interest? This is also an interesting topic. Now, if you want to enhance the developmental outcomes of children, then we have to look at all the components that are contributing to it. And I won't go into these details now, and don't want to repeat what already has been said. What I would like to point out, though, is the responsibility and the shared responsibility of the state, community, and the family, because this is oftentimes overlooked. And what we are facing now, since the crisis doesn't seem to be over, and the crisis doesn't only mean economic crisis, but also in many ways social crisis, that there is no clear understanding of the share of the responsibility and the best interest of the state, the communities, and parents are blamed and shamed for not being good enough for their children, while the community and the state doesn't take into consideration not only the legal obligation they have, but also their best interest in investing in children and ensuring that the joyful childhood is provided to all children, because this is possible, because this is also making our life and everyone's life more satisfactory. Obviously, there are many issues around that we cannot talk about now, but I guess it would be really essential to talk much more about this component, as those state parties who are reporting to the committee often feel that this is a formal requirement to meet the needs of families and children, and for the complicated political situations we are all aware of, voters are supporting the good families, in quotations, and would like to exclude, in many instances, those who are not fitting into their culture, into their perception, and that affects millions, actually tens of millions, hundreds of millions of children. Now, as we all know, young children are especially vulnerable, and this vulnerability is even increased when they are in vulnerable situations. Poverty is one of the most important factor contributing to this vulnerability, but also disability, the crisis of any kind, the lack of parental care or inappropriate parental care, war, natural disaster, and all the others. Now, the question is, how can we ensure that all those young children who are in vulnerable situations have access to a good enough care and services? Because of the time constraint, I try to be quick, because I don't want to take your time very long. There is a very important fact of life that is also overlooked very often, and that is the fact that education starts from birth. And this means that, as we always say, parents are the children's first educators. And I guess you made a lot of contributions regarding the importance of empowering parents and making them capable by increasing their knowledge and skills in parenting in the most appropriate way that fits for them. And this is very hard, again, to be accepted by many, because obviously the politicians and policymakers often think that parents are born as good enough parents, and they should know as soon as their children are born how to parent or how to take good care of children. And oftentimes the problem is that in many instances, even professionals working with children, medical professionals, health professionals, teachers, kindergarten teachers, and other caretakers are blaming the parents for not taking good care of their children, or neglecting them, or abusing them without understanding the root causes or understanding the differences in the perception or the approach. That is why we very strongly advise, based on the CRC, parenting support and service provisions. And it is very interesting that the Article 18 is talking about the primary responsibility of the parents in the upbringing of their children. And what I find very interesting when we have the dialogue with the state parties, that they are always referring the Article 18 and say that the parents have the primary responsibility when it comes to the upbringing of the children. But there is a second point in this article saying that the state must ensure that they are providing all the necessary support to the parents to fulfill this obligation, which means that parents and children are entitled to all forms of care and support and services. From this respect, the role of daycare, education and other services are absolutely essential. But as we all know, there are many, many debates also on the optimum lengths of stay at home, the optimum forms of daycare, the quality of daycare, and also the access for all, whether in some parts of the world it's still an issue that most of the opportunities for young children are paid services and not free, or the free service is limited and not the same quality as it should be. But also there are more and more very promising programs. Europe, I guess, UK can be really proud of the Sure Start program, which was proving that if you are involving parents, especially the most vulnerable young parents, together with very young children at an early age, then the children can avoid the delays in development, and also the parents can be empowered. So exactly the way you have just mentioned, they can learn their way how to be good enough parents and how to provide the best to their children, but also being satisfied themselves and not being so frustrated by the repetition of their own troubled childhood, or because of their circumstances, being a lone mother, being teenage mothers, living in poverty, not being educated enough, not finding an employment, and so on. Sure Start, I guess, was one of the most promising programs to find a good balance between home-based care and daycare provisions, because in many countries, like in this region, in Hungary and the Czech Republic, for instance, we've got years-long maternity leaves. In Hungary, 3 years paid maternity leave since '67. And it looks very impressive at the first sight, but if you are looking at the details, how isolated, depressed many of these mothers are, how is it compensating or trying to supplement the lack of employment opportunities? How many of those children would be much better off in a high-quality, good daycare, and the mothers could go to work, while this is not an option, because there is a very strong public pressure that mothers should stay at home and take care of their children, as they don't read the literature. Politicians never, I mean, I wouldn't say never, but hardly ever read the research outcomes, so that's a big question, why are we doing all those research, but that's another issue. Now, what is also interesting with the Sure Start programs, and why I'm so keen, I was very keen on implementing it in Hungary, and I'm really happy that we had the opportunity since 2006, with the help of the EU funds, implementing in the 36 most deprived regions, the Sure Start houses, is that it gives the opportunity to the local communities also to understand the importance of involving parents, and not only providing care for the children while the parents are away or working, but also that many, many parents who exactly had the difficulties you've been just describing, to be there without being educated. So they could be present, they could see how those professionals or semi-professionals working in the children's houses are playing with the children, being involved without being shamed. And also that this was an opportunity for them to build their capacities through learning other parents and other families' experiences and patterns. So by the time children go to kindergarten, for instance, there is a strong belonging to the community. Obviously, in Hungary, we had a very strong emphasis on integrating Roma families and very poor families. So by the time kids are going to kindergarten and school, there is no resistance towards them, and there is no segregation, exclusion. Rather, the community is learning how to live together with the most deprived families, and understanding that it is not only the children's best interest, but also the community's best interest to see these children thriving and not being deprived of everything practically. Obviously, part of this is the right to play and leisure. For many parents, this is hard, especially what we could face, and this was coming out from the UK, Sure Start evaluation also, that especially for the young mothers, it's hard to accept that play is okay, and they can also play with their children. That's not childish or not something they should avoid. And also that learning through play is one of the most important activities children can do in this period of life, and probably even later as well. Now, modern communication technologies are influencing, as Minecraft was one of the examples. What we just had 2 weeks ago in Geneva, actually last week, a new general day of discussion on the digital media and child rights, which was a fascinating meeting. And we were focusing on 2 issues. One, obviously, protection from harm and decreasing the harm. But on the other hand, also providing access to all children to education opportunities, opening up the world, especially those who otherwise couldn't have access to information, good quality information, not only to video games, of course. And one of the main focus I try to direct this whole discussion towards, and I was not alone, was how to convince those who are making policies and want to filter the internet and the digital media that we should increase the resilience of children and make them healthy, and not, instead of preferring the censorship on the digital media, not mentioning the fact that besides in a small number of countries this is almost impossible to do, and hopefully this is not what we are aiming at. Now, young children's vulnerability to risk is much higher than of the older children. So from a rights-based perspective, this means that they need more protection and much more services provided. And this is especially relevant when it comes to children belonging to ethnic religious minorities, migrant refugee children, unaccompanied children, even at a very early age. And also the committee is very keen on ensuring that every child has access to a free birth certificate, because what we are facing, that tens of millions of children are living without birth certificate, meaning that they are not entitled to social services, health care and education. Also, identity is becoming a big issue, especially because of the new technologies. Many people are welcoming IVF, surrogacy, and other techniques, not mentioning adoption as a traditional one. And do not consider the risks of losing an identity or having no access to identity at all, not mentioning all those scandalous cases what we are facing this just recent one, the Australian surrogacy case when twins were born and to a Thai surrogate mother, when the Down syndrome child was not needed, rejected by the family, and just like in a supermarket, they said they pick the healthy girl child and leave behind the Down syndrome little boy with heart problems as well. This is something not regulated properly from a child health perspective. It's absolutely clear what is our approach. But we've just had India at the committee, and we realized that there are over 100 surrogacy clinics in India alone, and their cash flow is about $4 billion a year. So, but obviously it's not the mothers, the surrogate mothers, who are gaining the profit. They are exploited, and their children oftentimes are separated from them for the time of the pregnancy because they are kept in these surrogacy clinics while their children are at home. So this is also, from a child rights-based perspective, quite annoying and quite problematic. What we should look at much more closely and learn much more about, because again, the issue here is that obviously we are all very happy that technology is developing. The question is whether we should try everything what is possible technically, or should think first and regulate it properly so that children or all those affected are not at risk. That leads us to the harmful practices and other harmful, the committee was, I guess many were waiting or have been waiting for a long time for this new general comment. The Committee on the Rights of the Child, together with the CEDAW committee, finalized and yesterday approved the first ever joint general comment on harmful traditional practices. And I'm really happy to announce that. It will be published very soon, I guess next week or within a couple of weeks. And why it is important from our perspective, I guess, that it's not only talking about the most well-known traditional, harmful traditional practices like female genital mutilation, but it is mentioning all kind of violation of right to physical integrity of the children. And this will generate a lot of discussion, a lot of debates, and I guess it is good news. A lot of interesting debates follow, but I'm also sure that this will lead to a lot of good training materials, handbooks on how to implement it and how to understand better why is it so important to respect the rights of the child from this point of view as well. Very briefly, I would like to talk about some European activities concerning child rights and early childhood, not so early only. First of all, in another hat of mine, in my Eurochild hat, if you like, I would like to inform you about the Child Rights Champion action. We've been taking active part. Probably many of you know, some others are not aware of it, that before the European parliamentary elections, 14 international and European child rights organizations decided to launch a call for the new prospective members or already elected members to become child rights champions. And in our manifesto, we tried to convince them that they should commit themselves before being elected or re-elected, that in case they are becoming members of the new European Parliament, they are representing child rights and they are doing everything for the better implementation of the rights of children. Now, this was a very peculiar exercise because we were really curious what is happening, how many are daring not signing or not giving us any feedback. But if I want to be positive, and I try always, it's not easy. Perhaps it's a self-regulatory issue that I'm not very positive, but I'm working on it. So we had actually 347 MEPs and candidates to the European elections who committed themselves. And this was quite a good outcome. Sadly enough, only 90 of them were elected or re-elected, but at least what we can say that out of the 700, I don't know exactly how many, 730 something members of the European Parliament, now we have 90 child rights champions. And what we are going to do in the future is approaching them time to time when it comes to child rights or child-related policies, issues, and we will try to engage them to be actively involved in promoting child rights and those policies that are serving the best interests of children in the European Parliament. I guess this was, in itself, it was an interesting advocacy tool, but also it was interesting to see who was responding, which parties were more active. So it needs to be analyzed and evaluated, but in itself, I guess, it could give some kind of a better visibility to children and children's issues for those who were interested. Another very important long-term program what we've been involved in is implementing the recommendation of the EU Commission on investing in children, which is a long-term program, and it is meeting all the requirements we've been mentioning so far: very strong holistic family policies, parent support and parenting support, breaking the cycle of poverty in Europe. Part of it is mentioned, but it's a separated program I would like to talk briefly, is opening doors, the deinstitutionalization of children and its implication on early childhood policies as well, which is a very important and main area of our activity in Eurochild, but also of other NGOs and experts in Europe. Also the reconciliation of family, private and working life and its implication on ECD. Again, the best interest of the child. However, we know that this is one of the most challenging issues within the EU, with very low birth rate, more women needed on the labour market, while the conditions are not met. Not even the Barcelona targets providing enough early childhood provisions for young children and also out-of-school care, which is often overlooked. A new program also Eurochild is involved in is the EU Alliance for Investing in Children, which is aiming at enhancing this recommendation, because as you all know, the European Union is not in a position to push the member states in many ways or oblige them to implement the policies. The Investing in Children program is a recommendation, although a very strong one. And we only hope that this network of 23 European other networks and NGOs will be powerful enough to make visible the fast-growing child poverty and its consequences, promoting child well-being across Europe. And also, the tool would be to encourage the member states to implement the European Commission's recommendation as fully as they can. And obviously, this could generate, again, a lot of discussion, and we would need much more data and much more information and much more good practice and all the well-known things. So what we are going to do in the next couple of years is looking at the limited resources we've got, and probably you are aware of the fact, as an accession region, so to say, that the EU funding on child-related issues is decreasing, so it's not as much as it should be. Also, the budget cuts, due to the crisis, have impacted at the first place the social and educational sector, and also the, of course, health sector to a certain extent, but this shouldn't mean that we are not committing ourselves and others, if possible, to implement child rights in early childhood as fully as we can. Thank you for your attention.